Good morning, everyone. Good morning. So my name is Madhur. I'm a managing partner and CEO with Praxis Global Alliance. We're a boutique specialist consulting firm which does a lot of AI execution end to end for organizations. And we support a lot of private capital investors, doing tech diligences, commercial diligences, etc. This panel is not about me. A very interesting topic around AI prosperity with sovereignty. Of course, we stay away from any political commentary, but the intent is to talk about commercial aspects of AI innovation and adoption. So I'll let my panelists introduce themselves a little bit as well before we get going with interesting conversation.
Sure, thanks, Madhu. Hi, everyone. I'm Yingwen from Albourne Partners. For those who are not familiar with us, we're a UK-founded all alternatives investment advisor. We advise about $750 billion US dollars in alternatives today, serving about 300 institutional investors around the world. We invest across hedge funds, private equity, venture, real estate, and real assets. Personally, I'm based in Hong Kong, looking after our firm's Pan-Asia private equity and venture funds, as well as everything in Greater China, from venture all the way to buyout.
Hi, this is Sang-Myung Lee from KIC. So KIC, obviously, Sovereign Wealth Fund of Korea, AUM is about $200 billion. And we, as a private equity group, manage about 10%, so about $20 billion AUM. And about 2/3 of capital we allocate to fund investment, and remaining 1/3 goes to co-investment or trade investments. For BC strategy, it's one of our latest strategy that we implemented in 2017. And since then, we almost half of capital goes to trade investment into kind of portfolio companies, and remaining half goes to the fund, predominantly who can provide co-investment or trade investment access. And our team deploy about $2 billion to $2.5 billion fresh capital every year. And for venture capital, we deployed about 10% of that, like $200 million a year.
Excellent. Thank you so much. So let's start with the basics. Maybe we'll start with you. So what does AI sovereignty mean? We've been speaking about power of AI, what it's done, commercially, what it's trying to do with manpower, organizational productivity, etc., etc. But the whole aspect of sovereignty, what is it about? What really makes this complex?
Well, I think what makes it complex is there's no straight answer. Each region is approaching this very differently. With the US, with the Chips Act, it's very clear. It's about the hardware. And then when it comes to setting the rules, you're leaving it to your private corporations like OpenAI and NVIDIA, lazy set the rules of the game globally. Now, conversely, Europe, it's all about regulation. And a lot of it is focused on kind of fundamental rights. It's on kind of, data, ethical use, energy, clean energy transition. So a lot of the fundamental kind of behind the scenes of using AI. And in China, incidentally, it's actually all about personal data. China has a Cyber Security Administration office that basically you need for any company that holds more than 1 million users' personal data, you need their approval before you can even apply for an IPO. So that's 3 regions, 3 very, very different approaches.
When we talk about AI, when we tease this out a little bit more, there is data, there is compute and the models, right? And then there is, the applications themselves and the users. And, in a world where, organizations are global, employees are distributed, employees are traveling, vendors, partners are global, and hopefully stays that way. What does sovereignty mean at all these levels? Can it even be defined? Maybe, if you can talk a little bit, from your vantage point, how do you see sovereignty, and where does it stop and where does it end?
So I think AI sovereignty is more like control. So like you mentioned, control over data, control over kind of compute infrastructure, or control the models as you need. And on top of that, models that sits on top of that. But as a KIC or me, as a financial investor, we don't see this through the lens of kind of national strategy or national security. But for us, it's more like understanding how these elements actually shape kind of competitive advantage or opportunities. So government or government-related officials may frame this as a kind of sovereignty or national security, but we frame it, it's more like fundamental driver of risk and return. And kind of many of cases, or almost all country, when a country push about the controlling data or data localizations or even sovereign models, then when it comes to me, it's more like the question about, does it kind of make a barrier or does it make a kind of investment opportunity? And sometimes it comes both ways. So, for example, there's an obvious geopolitical tension and is between U.S. and China, and I think we are one of few institutional investor who invest in both China and U.S. AI industry, because we see that the kind of their kind of competing landscape or the importance of AI sovereignty actually created investment opportunity for us.
But how do you see the investment landscape having evolved? Because we're coming from the world, fossil fuels to sort of oil to data, and this has also become a resource that that now has national importance and not just commercial importance. So has the investment strategy changed? And I'll come to you, because from an LP perspective, you work with a lot of GPs. So how are they altering their strategies? But yeah, maybe if you want to continue a little bit.
Yeah. So you use kind of new oil as a kind of computing power. So obviously the computing indeed, or computing or data center or powers, all the things are the bottleneck for this area because of the secular trend of kind of growth of AI demands. But so some sovereign wealth fund or some sovereign see this as more like kind of strategically. So they act like some sovereigns act like an energy security or energy fund. But for KIC, we only use one lens as a kind of financial investor. So rather, because of the secular trend, we see these are more like model agnostic opportunity, especially so whether OpenAI wins or Gemini wins or DeepSeek or any other kind of model in the world wins, but they all need those kind of computing power or infrastructure, like a data center. So we don't frame it as a national security or kind of strategy that we need to deliver, but we see as a kind of high conviction investment opportunity.
Talk to us a little bit about how funds are altering strategies.
Yeah, so I think for us, partially because I sit in Asia, I cover the Asia funds. I'd say it's a lot of filling the gap. Right, just case in point. Today if you look at all data center power in the world, about 70% of that sits in the US. But if you think about the internet traffic around the world, actually 55% is coming from Asia. So basically, we have a gap in Asia, and if we're going to be increasingly concerned about data security, data sovereignty, then Asia, as an investment opportunity, data centers built in Asia is a growing piece, and we do see it. Like we cover plenty of infrastructure funds. There is a marked increase in the rise of Asia infra investments. Now that's on kind of the hardware front, but obviously chips, it's still going to be an issue, I would say, particularly for China. So what have they done? Self-sustaining. So they have SMIC. They're building their own chips. Currently, the hottest kid in town in China is Cambricon. So they are also getting up there, fighting neck to neck with Biren, and Biren, who is benchmarked against NVIDIA. So that's the NVIDIA of China. Now that's even within data centers, right? Even if you had the chips, actually the reality is it's much more complex than that. There are the transmission cables, there is electricity, and on the topic of electricity, I think in Europe, where there is a lot of focus on clean energy. So Europe today has something like 43% of total installed capacity is clean energy. China is over 50. US expects to get to 30 in 2028. Right, so that's still like 3 years from now. So I think that there are a lot of gaps that each country has, and they will need to fill if they want to achieve all these different goals that they're setting for themselves in terms of sovereignty and independence.
Interesting. And one of my favorite topics really is about sort of the trade-off between innovation, and sovereignty, right? When you look at US and China, and they're going after speed and scale and going after, innovating at a very fast pace, while Europe has gone towards ethical AI and they're already regulating it. I sometimes wonder whether the regulation has happened too quickly, that it'll actually stifle innovation, or, so which side of the camp are you in? Is there the right path? Are we thinking about sovereignty too quickly before innovation is really scaled up, or is it the other way around?
Well, I think, yeah, if we take a leaf out of the internet, right, regulation always lags innovation. I mean, that is the reality. So I don't think it's about whether these regulations are coming up too quickly and stifling innovation. I think true innovation will find its way. No matter, I mean, it's almost like the more you try to squash it, the more it comes out. And actually, that's why DeepSeek came about, right? It's because US was trying to squash China on OpenAI and all of that, and they realized like, okay, now I really need to find a way. Whereas previously, maybe I think if there wasn't such pressure, we may not have DeepSeek, or at least maybe not so quickly. So I think on innovation, regardless, even in Europe, I think there are local needs that will drive that innovation. There's local languages, there's local culture, where every country will kind of need the AI, their own AI model. Even in Asia, in ASEAN, right? Like there's with Singapore, but then we have all these neighbors with different religions, different beliefs. The AI models that we're going to use and employ, we need to be very cognizant of what the different sensitivities are.
Understood. As you make investments, you said you invest in US, China, really agnostic to the models, in some ways hedging perhaps. Are you investing in Europe as well? And is that experience from a risk return perspective feeling any different than the Chinese and the US investments?
Yes and no, but we're still actively looking at AI opportunity in Europe, both fund investment, also co-investment and direct investment. But for AI, or at least for kind of AI research perspective or engineering perspective, we have to admit, US and China, those are the two countries who has the most capable human resource or capacity. And also those two countries are the single country who has kind of financial markets, finance, or kind of investments, and then human resource, and then all the action wealth within single country. But we understand, just like a SaaS, enterprise SaaS software, there's a lot of very good, successful SaaS companies in Europe, and doesn't matter about whether it's London or Romania or other countries. So in that sense, we are still with the support from our London office. We're still actively sourced deal.
And therefore, how do you view AI infrastructure, so data centers, chips, etc.? Is that becoming a better asset class, compared to what it was 10 years back? Of course, there was not much AI back then, but data centers have been there forever. Are you seeing a distinct shift in your investment strategy, or, national priorities, focusing sovereign dollars towards these and new asset classes?
Yes. So, although we are a sovereign wealth fund, but we are just our mission is really 100% financial investors, and then there are other government entity that serves the national kind of mission to that. So, but obviously, South Korea put as much as kind of the most effort that can put into those sectors, because they understand the importance of kind of AI sovereignty, and then like a kind of, or AI the powers and data centers, all the AI infrastructure we will need, and also like I mentioned, because of this the structural secular trend of growth of AI demands, doesn't matter which model will win, or which kind of business, or kind of architecture will win, but it's obvious that all the power or AI, all the AI infrastructure factors will need. So our real estate team and infrastructure team put more dollar toward those kind of AI infrastructure, or we call AI real estate into the sector than ever, and then reduce other sectors like kind of hotels or office and real estate team. Or
Interesting. And the same question, if I were to, sort of take your perspective on AI models. Now we're seeing AI applications. The previous speaker spoke about it a little bit. They're the models, underlying models that are powering some of these applications. Are you seeing, competitive advantage being created, by doing better models and better applications? Or is it really about owning the pipes, on the infrastructure side, and that's pretty much what an investor can control right now?
I think it's a chicken and egg. I mean, for a lot of large models, I mean, if I just take China, there are the six dragons, right? All six models are perfectly functional, and the truth is, the consumers like you and I'm not going to tell the difference, right? Whether it was GPT-5 or GPT 3.5 answering me,
Right.
because the way we are using it, it's still at a very general level. And I think that's really the first wave of power users today. You might get some prosumers, but very few of that user group is really using these models to its maximum. So what we're seeing, if I take a leaf out of China, where I think there the competition is actually the fiercest amongst the six, it's really finding the business model. In one case, right, they kind of given up on the consumer market and they've just gone straight to serving governments. So what that works out is then the data becomes the most important. So for China, it's actually all about the vertical data. So two of these six dragons have pivoted to serving businesses. Now, even within verticals, some of the use cases we're seeing, manufacturing and robotics. Right. So if you think about China as the manufacturing powerhouse of the world, the amount of manufacturing production data they have is unrivaled. So within each vertical, be it I'm manufacturing a car or I'm manufacturing, kind of hard machinery or medical devices, I think that, becomes actually the new playground. I mean, the models that you have today is probably, I think I was actually introduced to this term last week called Maya, which is something like, as it's something about being there and then just being good enough. And that is kind of how the hardware AI application engineers are thinking about it.
And as you see AI sort of becoming a tool of statecraft, so to speak, right? Like it's being spoken about in the government offices as much as in the commercial offices. From your perspective, as you construct the portfolio, how are you managing the risk? Has anything changed in terms of your risk assessment, factoring in different geopolitical risks, because of usage of, data centers or, LLM models or whatever? Just talk to us a little bit about risks and any red flags that you are now prioritizing when you are evaluating investments. And I come to you with the same question. Yeah.
So probably less about red flags, but definitely there's a lot of risks. I think the biggest unknown risk the biggest risk right now that is known is the U.S. Outbound Investment Act, right? So there are very clear limitations of what you can or cannot invest, especially where it pertains to China investments. Now, the unknown risk, which is what is actually stopping further deployment into the space, is whether that scope of the OIS would expand. And that no one can really tell at this point. The other thing is about data. I think there is a lot of concern about data that's being used to train. And as users, when we use these models, is our data being captured? From a corporate perspective, like our own firm, we are only allowed to use one model. We cannot access the rest because the IT department has determined certain security limitations. So I think from an investment perspective, you want to be very aware of the rules that you need to be compliant with, depending on the geography that you are investing in.
Got it. The same question for you because you're constructing portfolios across countries. So, is there a different perception of risk and management of risk now because of AI?
No, we're very similar to when Ingwen said, except the part that KIC actually allow to use multiple models when we work at the office. But to just add one more point on top of that is interestingly or ironically, I see more and more AI companies are getting sophisticated to comply the kind of sovereign or AI sovereignty or kind of complying the local regulations while they try to operate globally. So that's the one kind of interesting point that I'm observing. And many of startups are consider AI startups, especially AI startups, are considered them as to be a kind of global operator or a global player. So that from day one, they are think about kind of localization or complying local rules and regulations.
Do you see differences between Asia and Europe when it comes to when you're making investments, in these economies and in AI companies in these territories? Is there any difference in terms of the perception of risk, the quantification of risk, the clarity of risk as to what risk you're taking? Is there any difference at all?
There's a difference because even within KIC, all the reporting lines or investment committee, the question I can easily anticipate there's a question about kind of the exact question that you just gave me as kind of security or data control, and when it comes to especially but China and but as an investor and then the company that the kind of scale of the company that we're investing in, especially in China, is quite large. So we because of those kind of risks, we usually invest in the later stage company or kind of almost decacorn level of company in China. So they make sure they comply or they have a plan or at least the department function that control that they can control the risk. And when it comes to Europe, because naturally Europe has very good at a system, good at building at the system or regulation that kind of prevent potential risk around that. And Europe is the area that has the most high level of kind of the restriction or regulations in terms of the data protection rules.
And is more why we spoke about regulation and innovation sort of having some trade-off and some conflict with each other. More regulation creates more certainty of return, or is it a bad thing?
I don't think it drives certainty, but at least it drives clarity, right? So at least from an investment perspective, if the regulations are clear, I wouldn't say more regulations is better, but at least if the regulations are clear in terms of, especially in its interpretation,
Got it.
right? Then that helps us and investors because then it's very obvious to me where the lines are. I think today's environment, the issue is the regulations are not clear, and they are volatile. They could change very quickly. So that's what makes it difficult. But in terms of the returns, right? If you think about how quickly OpenAI has grown, I mean, it's now $500 billion company, right? Or Manus, the agent, it's the latest valuation is 500 million. It launched in Chinese New Year this year, so it's like a 7-month-old company. If you think from that perspective, actually the returns have been fast track, as the previous speaker also mentioned. Like the time compression is huge, and there is definitely an element of winner takes all. So I think it's kind of independent of regulation in that sense, but regulation has the potential to wipe that all out, right? If I just say, okay, now you're no longer allowed to sell it to private companies, you can only serve my Ministry of Defense, then that valuation's done. So the regulation could wipe out value very quickly. But if it's just kind of new regulations that's around kind of fair play and all that, and with clarity, I think that actually could help the industry deploy better.
Yeah. Well, I think India and China have seen some, jerkiness in regulation. We've seen this in gaming, we've seen this in edtech in China. You let innovation happen, prosper, large businesses emerge, and then one fine day, the value is sort of wiped out. So, in this case, perhaps it's not going to be wiped out per se, but the control moves back to the government because you've created an asset which is so germane to national security and sovereignty that the profit pool out of that gets sucked out. I think, extending that argument from investment asset class perspective, when you look at venture capital versus private equity, right? Is one or the other better place to capitalize on the AI opportunity from a financial perspective, or are both of them, the same?
So, I think the area of investment is very different between venture capital and private equity. And venture capital is betting on more like innovation and technology development and making a business model itself. So whether it's LLM or SLM or vertical AI, so VCs are betting on that. And private equity that I'm observing is whether they can successfully implement AI into their portfolio company, whether it's software company or whether it's kind of brick and mortar kind of traditional company. But the focus on the different, and then investment area seems like different. So we see them, very independently based on their each risk and return.
If we talk about countries like China, possibly India, even the US, the whole sort of Europe narrative around ethical AI, responsible AI, let's put the guardrails before we go too far. Are you seeing the government moving in that, the Asian governments, Singapore, Malaysia, Indonesia, China, Korea, are you seeing governments move towards ethical AI, or is the priority, mostly innovation at all costs?
Yeah, I don't think we've seen a very marked, kind of obvious ethical AI, but definitely there are safeguards, right, around what you could use, AI for, although that's actually dependent on the model. It's not that much different from how, in Singapore, like there are certain websites that are just censored or you can't access, or if you kind of access certain topics, you might get a call from an organization. So I think it's not that much more difference in that sense. I think for a country like Singapore, actually our biggest concern is probably data centers, because physically we just don't have the space. And what we are doing is working with our neighbors. We build data centers in partnership. We need to come out with a structure that works for both of us, because there is definitely a kind of sovereignty and independence factor in there. But I think so far, I think we've at least 3 big announced data center projects with Malaysia. I think that's showing that it is possible to work, with your neighbors. Not every country has the luxury of the landmass that US and China and India has. So we have to kind of find our ways around these issues.
Yeah, in fact, it's interesting you say that, because you compare this with 20 years back, the topic around food security, and the arguments are sort of the same, right? And then ultimately you get into bilateral investments and treaties and preferred partnerships and so on. From an AI perspective, also, when you look at maybe Korea, some of those things also, is the government really trying to drive investments and policy in a certain way? Are they trying to mandate sovereign investments in funds or businesses or countries of a certain kind? how proactive and or anxious, is the government to participate in this tide?
Yep. So government have very kind of very big initiatives, especially since we just got new governments on board, and there's the one of AI development is one of the top priority of the government, but at the same time they think they they don't want or they shouldn't be a driver of that car, but rather they just support all the corporates or kind of BCs or startups, but by kind of guiding them kind of clear regulations or guidelines, and then also kind of supporting through kind of as an LP capital into that ecosystems. And for example, recently the government led by the president kind of teamed up all the AI players in the ecosystem, so from kind of Samsung, LG, or even internet company to all the way to the startups and VCs to create a kind of healthy or more innovative kind of VC ecosystem to both invest and develop within Korean AI.
That's great. No, I think we are about time now. So thank you so much. I found the discussion very informative, very interesting. Of course, we're talking about a topic where it's tough to predict what's going to happen next month. But, we did a great job sort of bubbling up some of the issues, some of the opportunities, possibly some of the risks. So thank you so much. And thank you for the very patient audience. Really enjoyed the conversation. I hope you drew some conclusions out of this as well. Thank you so much.